Welcome to our talk. We are hacking the Salesforce Console, so hopefully this is the right room that you're expecting to be in. We are going to be talking through with the Winter 18 release. Lightning Console apps are now generally available, and with them there's a whole set of JavaScript APIs, as well as ways that you can build dynamic applications within those consoles for not only typical JavaScript components, but also utility bar applications. And we'll be walking through some of the ways you can use those APIs to build some of those types of applications. With that, my name is Jeff Oscarbo. I'm a technical architect at Aperio. And up here with me is Andrew Davis, who is a technical manager at Aperio. Next, we're going to go through kind of the overview of what we're going to walk through today. So we're going to discuss what is the Salesforce Console, what are the Lightning Console apps versus the classic console, some of the basics of using the new APIs for tabs and navigation, some of the functionality you can build based upon the utility bar and custom apps, and then finally talk through some events and orchestration and how you can build some kind of unique interactions between your components inside the console and within the utility bar with those types of features that Salesforce has. So with that, I'll turn it over to Andrew.
Hey, so morning, everybody. So first of all, what is the console? Just to set the context, make sure you guys know what we're talking about. So the console is a type of application that Salesforce has made available. It's been available for a number of years. That is what you call a tab-based workspace. So if you've never seen the console, just in case, this looks like an innocent list view. But if I click on any one of these cases, it still shows me my list view here on the left, but it opens up this tab-based workspace. So I can keep clicking on cases, and it's opening up two layers of tabs here. This top layer are what are known as workspace tabs, and then underneath we have sub-tabs. So for example, the top layer, you can configure console so that you can choose which objects you're showing in which layers and what relationships they have. So you could do that in Classic. You can do that in Lightning as well. So we've configured it so we have accounts up along the top layer, and you can see the details on accounts. But then cases related to the account open in subtabs. So quite intuitive. And if I were to go down here and look at the related objects, I could even open contacts, and contacts open as subtabs on the account. So the console is ideal as for folks who are dealing with a lot of records at a time in a fast-paced scenario. So one of the main use cases is for customer service agents, where they may have phone calls coming in. They've got cases that they're still working on from earlier in the day. They may have live agent, things like this. So they need to be dealing with a lot of different service cases, or maybe inside sales people who are working with a lot of different potential customers. At Aperio, we have a custom console that we use for project management. So we have project management that we track inside. So you can build your own custom consoles. You can choose the relationships between them. And this console, both in Classic and now in Lightning, this console itself is a single-page app. So it doesn't do a full, like Lightning experience, it doesn't do a full-page reload, but it just loads the data as needed. And loads the data as needed. So there's also ways of extending and customizing the console. So like with many things in Salesforce, most things in Salesforce, you can both config and code your way through customization. So you can configure both in the Classic and code using this, what's called the Console Integration Toolkit in the Classic console. And you can do the same with slightly different tools in the new Lightning Console apps. There's just a static screenshot here. This is the Classic console, and it actually looks basically the same as what I showed you just there, which was a Lightning Console app. You've got a list of cases along the left-hand side. You've got the central element, which is here showing a chatter feed related to those cases. And then on the right, you have what are known in Classic as custom console components. So console components were the way in Classic to add additional functionality. You could add Visualforce pages. You could add Canvas apps, these kinds of things. So this, I showed you the live version, but this is also a screenshot of the Lightning Console app. Similar ideas in both cases. So what are some of the distinctions between the classic console and the Lightning Console apps? So a few years ago, so they'd had the classic console for a number of years. But then a few years ago, all of a sudden, they introduced the Lightning Service Console. And all of a sudden, overnight, your classic console changed to look like Lightning Experience. But that change, and the way it looks right now, is actually just Lightning Design System. So if you're in Salesforce Classic, you open up a console, it looks like Lightning because of Lightning Design System. But underneath the hood, it was still the old console. So the classic console is basically a lot of iframes, a whole lot of iframes, and some magic that you can use to pass events and communication between those iframes. You would configure the classic console using App Manager, which is that tool you use to create any application, to choose which tabs and how they're related and so forth. And then, as I mentioned earlier, you could code using JavaScript and what's called the Console Integration Toolkit to automate a lot of stuff. And so my initial exposure to the classic console, we were doing a lot of JavaScript automation, and it was way ahead of its time. So even in the classic console from a few years ago, you could do passing events. You could fire events and register events and single-page app. You know, it sounds quite familiar. So it was ahead of its time, the classic console. And now we've got all of that built in with Lightning Experience. And so just now with this release, although Lightning Experience has been out for a couple of years, just now in Winter 18, you have a 100% Lightning-based console. So the new Lightning Console apps are top to bottom pure Lightning. So all of the things that you see inside the console app are Lightning components. So if I show you any of these things, I've got an account here, and you can use the app builder to customize your account homepage, dropping Lightning components on there. And you can have those Lightning components communicate with other Lightning components on the page, or now you can have them also control the console and communicate around the console, because everything about this screen that I'm showing you here is all built in Lightning. So unlocks a ton of capabilities. So for coding, I'll slip to the next screen here. I know it's hard to see, it's quite fine-grained here, but basically these three big blobs that you see in front of you, the two on the left are config options, what you can do with clicks, declarative stuff. And then on the right, that's your coding option. So even if you are a die-hard programmer, you really need to study and learn all of the amazing things you can do with config, with Lightning components in general, and Lightning console apps in particular, because you can do a whole lot of stuff these days just with the App Manager and App Builder that 6 months ago, 12 months ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, your only option would have been custom Visualforce page or completely custom. So the App Manager on the left, the App Manager is at a high level what you use to create a console app or modify the way the console app works. So I showed you how at the top level of the workspace tabs we had accounts, and then underneath it we've got some cases here, and we've got a contact over here. Well, you can choose. You can choose. Maybe you want contacts to open up in the top level, as a top workspace tab. That's up to you. That's configured using App Manager. Now, App Builder is what you use, same tool that you use to customize any record detail page. So if you want to make a customization to your account record detail page, you can drop in Lightning components like a chatter feed and so forth, or custom Lightning components you've built. And all of that is what will show up in your Lightning Console app. So when we prepared this demo, we created a case record page, and we dropped something into our case record page that is not a standard part of the case record page. We've created a custom component here that's a path component, and we've dropped another custom component on here called products and so forth. And we did write those components ourselves, but you can also, just drop pre-built components on here. And all of that is done using App Builder. So that's all, it's all config-based options. You need to really get to know your config-based options, and you want to exercise all the possibilities in config because really it's a lot in there that you can do. But at a certain point, you might have a need, a requirement that's so custom that you need to slip into code. And that's actually the main thing we're going to talk about today, is how you code for the Lightning Console apps using what's called the Lightning Console JavaScript API. So we need the marketing team to come up with something a little catchier for that one, but Lightning Console JavaScript API. And for all of this, you have one document from Salesforce that explains both Classic and Lightning, and that's what's called the Salesforce Console Developer Guide. So the Salesforce Console Developer Guide will tell you almost everything that's in our talk, or except for a few tips. We've got a few pro tips here, but most of this is in that Console Development Guide. So what we're going to talk about is 3 different capabilities that the Lightning Console JavaScript API gives you. The first is talking about tabs and navigation. You're probably off reading right now, but one category of thing that you can code is everything to do with tabs and navigation in the console. So I'm here as a user, an end user in the console, and I'm going to click this tab, and I focus this tab, and then I'm going to click this sub-tab and focus this, and I'm going to go ahead and close that tab. I'm going to open a new case. I'm going to switch to accounts. Everything that I'm doing here as a user, navigating between the tabs, opening, closing, focusing those, everything that I can do as a user, you can code. You can make happen using your code. So you can, for example, open a tab, close a tab, and you can also do a few things that you can't in code that you can't do just as a user. For example, you can highlight tabs in code. You can change their icons and labels and so forth. So, for example, I mentioned we have a custom component here for products. And this is a very simple example. We've just got a list of products. But there's not, within Salesforce, there's not a natural relationship between products and cases. It's not a product that's tied to the case. What it is here, what we're showing is that some products that happen to be owned by the account that is related to that case. So we couldn't take advantage of the built-in ability to just open products in a sub-tab. We did a little bit of code here, and I click this link here, and I can open up a sub-tab for this particular product. So I'm working on resolving a case for a customer, and oh yeah, I can see that you have 4 of these generators, and I'm going to go and click in and find a little bit more detail about one of these products that you happen to own. So although simple, we've done that with simple effect, but we're enabling that through code. So the brief version of how to enable that tab-based activity through code is summarized in these 2 lines down at the bottom of the slide, but then I'll go into the code and show you a demo. All you need to do to enable any Lightning component anywhere in your system to communicate to the console and control the console is drop this one tag in there, Lightning Workspace API, and then you give it some name. So we've given it the name Workspace. You could call it whatever you want. But you drop that tag into any component, and all of a sudden, you've got a gateway. It's like a remote control for the console. So you can make this available for any of your components that need to control the console. Then what we do is we take that name, because we named it Workspace. You can take that name Workspace, and you can refer to it in your Lightning component controller, the JavaScript controller. So I'm going to go over to the demo here. And as promised, I've got this Lightning component, and it's called Case-Related Products component. And it is, in fact, the exact same component that I showed you there. You can see we've got the markup here for a table. We've got a product name and purchase date column here, which are what you're seeing over here, product name and purchase date. So this is the same component that you're seeing here on the page. So what we've done is we've dropped this component in here, Lightning Workspace API, and given it the friendly name Workspace. We've also got a little bit more markup here, iterating through however many products happen to be owned by this customer. And we're creating a hyperlink. And the hyperlink has a simple on-click method that calls our controller, calls this product clicked controller action in the Lightning component. So if I come over to the Lightning component, I've got my product clicked controller handler. And what I'm doing here is I'm doing a little bit of setting up. And then what I'm doing is component find workspace. So I'm going back to my component, and I'm saying, hey, where's that workspace tag? Where's that workspace component that we've embedded in our component? Because I want to make use of that. I'm going to call that workspace API, and that then allows me to call methods on workspace API. So I can call all kinds of methods, and the Lightning Console developer guide will tell you the full range of methods. We've just got a couple of sample ideas on here. We've got the method getFocusedTabInfo. And then later on, we've got the method openSubTab. So first of all, what we do is we get a little bit of information about what tab we're currently on, and then we open a subtab on that same area, the same workspace that we're on. The one thing to note here, every part of this Lightning Console JavaScript API, all of the responses are promises. So if you're not familiar with promises in JavaScript, they're a fantastic way of working with what you'd call asynchronous callouts. So anything, if you perform an action in JavaScript and it's going to take a little bit of time to go get some data, but then you want to perform some action whenever that finishes. So whenever you finish, then you use a promise to basically say, whenever getFocusedTabInfo finishes, then I want to do this other thing. So, and you can chain these promises together. You can say, first do this, and then do this, and then do this. And if there's an error, make sure you catch the error. We don't have any error handling in here. So it's not quite ready for production. But so all we're doing is we're defining a variable called parent_tab. And then we're checking the response here that we got. We're checking the response. When we got information on our focus tab, we want to check, are we on a subtab? Because if we're on a subtab, then the parent tab is actually going to be the one above where we are right now. So I know you're probably confused, but it's actually not that bad. So when we call getFocusedTabInfo, the response basically says, hey, you're on a subtab here. You're on a case subtab. So we say, OK, great. Tell me who's my parent. And it says, oh, well, your parent is this account tab up here. So we say, OK, great. Well, my parent tab, then, I want to go to that one. And then I'm going to fire this command, openSubTab, and I want to say, I want this subtab to be on the parent tab. So I'm going to find the parent tab, and then I'm going to take whatever is the product ID, the product that I wanted to open, and I'm opening a new subtab pointing to that product, and then I'm focusing it, which means I'm actually navigating you to that tab. So if I click on this, it'll actually focus that tab. You could have it such that if you click on it, it opens it in the background but doesn't immediately focus it. So you can, it depends entirely on your need and your use case and so forth. So in short, basically anything you can do with tabs and navigation you can control using JavaScript in this way. And a few things you couldn't do as an end user, you can also control. So
there you want to go ahead. You can grab this. OK. We're switching over to take a look at some of the utility bar applications. So you could have seen in a couple of the screenshots that Andrew showed that we have this utility bar along the bottom of our Lightning Console app. And so one of the benefits of applications that you embed in this utility bar is that they live throughout the life cycle of the Lightning Console app. So as soon as your user enters that app, these utility bar applications are generated and initialized at that point in time. So in this case, we have, overall with the utility bar, there's a new set of APIs that you can use to communicate with it. So you can do things like minimize if you have one that's open, you can minimize it, you can maximize it, you can toggle it to actually make it modal. You can change both the icon and the label in the utility bar itself, as well as when it's maximized, there's a panel icon and label, which are up at the top, you can see in that history, that you can change those as well. You can also set the height and width, and there's a couple of other functions that you can do also. And in this case, very similar to the Workspace API, you can use the utility bar API, that Lightning utility bar API tag. Once you add that to your component, you now have the ability to call and make commands against this API. So I'll show a quick demo. Take a look here. You can see I've got this downtime reporter. So as soon as I click that and expand it up, you can see, once again, we've got a label and icon in the utility bar itself, and then we have the panel header label and icon. And now I've got some functionality that when I go ahead and click this submit button, I'm going to change the panel header and icon, and then after a certain amount of time, it'll actually minimize automatically, and then change the utility bar icon and label. So you see now it says submitting report across the top. It will go ahead and minimize. You'll see now it says report submitted along the bottom. And then after another couple of seconds, we now have a total report submitted with a count that kind of increments along that. So those are just some of the pieces of functionality you can control with the JavaScript API. You can also do things like highlight, which we'll show in another demo. One other thing I wanted to call out was hitting that. We've got a modal functionality that's available to you as well. So if you need to call attention to this, and we'll show this later on where we can open up and close these from other console components using Lightning events. If you want to call attention to your utility bar application and make sure that the user can't interact with anything else in the console, you have the ability to do that. So I can't actually click or make any other changes to the console currently until I do whatever actions required to turn off that modal functionality for the utility bar application. So I will take a quick peek into the code itself. So taking a look here, you'll notice one key thing is we've got implements the Flexi page available for all page types. What that means is you have to have that interface to be able to embed this into a utility bar application. You can see the next tag we have here is that utility bar API, which we're giving an ID of utility bar. I've got some attributes below that that are holding onto some state information. I've got a handler for some initialization logic, and then some of the inputs and the buttons, kind of that markdown down there. So if we take a quick peek at what our controller is doing, we've got our initialization function. Once again, this is just setting up some variables that I end up using later on, just timestamp, is modal, submission count, and now where a lot of the logic occurs is inside of this submit. So we've got, very similar to before, we've got a component.find utility bar, and that's where we now have this JavaScript object that we can use to communicate with the utility bar API. And so we can set the panel header icon, set the panel header label, so that's where we've got the check mark and says submitting report. And then I've got a couple of timeouts here just to show some of the other functionality, which is where we've got this minimize utility. We've got setting the utility label, so that's where the label along the bar itself. Same thing with the utility icon, that's the icon along the bar itself. And then finally, we've got I reset the panel header and label back to their original values, and then I increment that submission count, and then ultimately put the utility icon and label and have that count, that kind of running count. And then just showing you the modal functionality. The toggle modal call itself is very straightforward. You just pass in this enable modal mode, which just takes a Boolean. So in this case, I'm holding is modal, I'm holding that kind of state value inside of that variable, and we're just doing the opposite of that. So that kind of covers some of the generic features and functionality you can use with the utility bar. Minimize this, go back. So if we hop back to our next topic, this is events and orchestration. And so first and foremost, what are events and what is orchestration? So console events and Lightning events are two different types of events that you can hook into as part of the overall Lightning framework that's out there. You've probably used Lightning events previously. Console events are standard events that Salesforce provides, so things along the lines of when you focus a tab, open a tab, close a tab, any of those types of actions are emitting events that you can listen to in both your utility bar applications as well as your regular Lightning components that you've embedded in the tabs and sub-tabs that you're utilizing. Your components can handle those, you can register inside your component to handle actions when they listen for those events. And then you can also emit events as well, at least for the custom Lightning events that you define. And then orchestration overall is where you are taking a view where you have one component that handles DML updates. It handles the creation and destruction of other components. It kind of manages your business logic, whereas each of your other individual components don't need to care about where they're coming from or what's supposed to happen next. You have one overall component that's kind of running that business process in the background. And you can use Lightning events and the console events to not only transfer state information up and down, but also call different commands that each of those different types of components can be listening to. And one distinction about component events and application events. Component events are used within a set of components in a parent-child hierarchy. So if you had one Lightning component that contained other Lightning components, that's where you'd want to use component events. In the scenarios I'll be detailing out, we'll be using application events because we're going to be communicating between the utility bar applications and components that are embedded on the record pages. Some of the orchestration options that you have available are mainly driven by what you're trying to achieve. So when you're trying to achieve orchestration or a business process across a single record, that's where you'd want to embed your Lightning component that handles that orchestration logic within the record, the Lightning page for that record. Whereas if you were trying to have some sort of orchestration that's cross records, if you had, say you wanted to open multiple subtabs and keep state information about what's going on in each of those individual subtabs, that's where you'd want to embed it in the utility bar application instead. And the main reason behind that is, if we take a look at what is the rendering timeline for components, you'll notice once again the utility bar API is very long, utility bar components are very long-lived. So they almost live the entire life cycle as you've created your Lightning Console app, and then once it gets unloaded, that's when your utility bar applications will also be unloaded. Whereas if you are trying to do orchestration within the context of a single record, that's where you can see here, we've got some examples of, when you open a subtab, as soon as you close that subtab, that Lightning component's going to get destroyed if it's based on that record page. So if you're trying to orchestrate across a number of subtabs, you may actually lose your orchestration component if you plan on placing that inside of your inside of the record page itself. One thing to call out, so I did mention before that utility bar applications do get initialized as soon as your console app is initialized. There is a setting that you can say you do not want that to happen. I think by default it's checked, but you can say I don't want this loaded in the background, and it'll actually get initialized the first time someone opens it. So just something to consider, and you may have a use case specifically for that functionality. So now I'm going to walk through a quick demo of how this events and orchestration kind of works in practice. Oops, need to go back. All right, so just first and foremost, I want to show what will happen with a tab-focused kind of out-of-the-box event. So what I'm going to do here is, as I hop back to this edge communications, you'll see that we're on cross-sell, and the cross-sell component down at the bottom, or sorry, the utility bar application has been highlighted. And so what I've got here is I'm listening for that tab-focused event, and once that's been called, I check to see if the new record that's been focused is in the status of cross-sell, which in this case this is, and then I just kind of highlight that component of, hey, you want to start using this cross-sell utility that we've got. So once again, just kind of bouncing back and forth, listening to that standard Lightning Console event that's being emitted. Now, another functionality I want to show is, actually I'll hop back here. If I were to open this up and I can say, I've shared the cross-sell options, well, notice what happens is it actually updates the status of my case to closed, basically invoking an action that ultimately calls DML to update the case itself. And so this is, once again, kind of a scenario where you can use orchestration. And I'll show you in the code that this case path component is actually handling the logic. And once again, we decided to use the component on the record page itself was because it's really within the context of this single record that we want to make the action and handle this business process. Another piece of functionality I have, just showing some more of the custom Lightning events. Let's see if I change this to cross-sell and I save this. You'll notice I'd immediately pop open that cross-sell component as well. So just once again, another way you can listen to some of these events and then have other components take action based upon that information. So if we take a look at the code to show you what this looks like. So we've got this case path component. Got some handlers here. You'll notice the very first one is a handler for an event called cross-sell complete. So when you saw that functionality of I hit that button on my cross-sell component that said, yes, I've shared the cross-sell information, and it closed the case, this is the function in the controller that gets called when that event gets emitted. And once again, this is a custom Lightning event, custom application Lightning event, not the component event. I've also got a handler for initialization. And in this case, you can see I'm registering for an event as well. So you need to have this markup if you want to register to emit events. So in this case, I've got an event called open cross-sell, which emits an event called open cross-sell utility, which you can guess, once it switches over to cross-sell, we emit this event, and it opens up that cross-sell utility. I've got some attributes in here, once again, just storing some state. And something I wanted to call out, if you haven't used it yet, take a look at the Lightning Data Service. I don't have a controller behind this page. I'm using the Lightning Data Service to actually update that case record, as well as poll for changes and get some information. It's a really, really powerful feature that is generally available. I think it might not have come out this winter. I think it might have been this summer. But I know it's generally available now. So if we take a look at that controller, once again, I've got some initialization. One of the key pieces here is this handle record updated. This is what gets fired when the record gets updated on the page. It's a hook that we've got into that Lightning Data Service. A lot of the stuff in here is just for setting up the component and making it look UI-wise to make sure it updates and shows which ones are complete and which stage which status you're actually in. The key piece for us is down here. This current status is equal to cross-sell. I have this helper functionality that opens cross-sell utility. And with this helper function, really all I'm doing is just emitting this open cross-sell utility event. The event itself is just firing, and then I'll show you in a second how that's being listened to. So if we take a look at the cross-sell component, you can see we've got a handler for that event, this open cross-sell utility event. So it's now listening for that event, and then it executes some code inside of our cross-sell utility, or inside of our controller. And then we've also got a handler, just to show you an example of, here's that Lightning tab focus. So slightly different syntax for these non-custom events, the standard console events. And then once again, we've got a function that gets called once that event gets fired. In this case, we also register an event called cross-sell complete. So if we take a look at what these events are doing, on the tab focused, we're actually using the Workspace API to, once again, get the focus tab info. And because we are in a component that's in the utility bar, we don't have specific understanding of which record is being updated. We just know that this event has fired. So what I do is I'm actually listening and finding when the tab has been focused. We reload the case record. And then down here, once again, this is part of the Lightning Data Service. We are going in and checking to see what that status is. And so if the status of this newly highlighted or newly focused tab is equal to cross-sell, that's where I'm highlighting the utility and unhighlighting the utility when you switch over to a different tab. And once again, all this code is up on GitLab, and we've got some references to it as well, so you can look through this later on to look at some more of the details. The open cross-sell utility functionality, this is where we are opening the utility itself. This is where we're listening for that open cross-sell utility event that's being emitted from the case path component that we saw. So once that's been emitted, this is listening for it and saying, OK, it's time for me to open up. And it's just calling the utility bar API to open up the utility. And then I didn't show you, but on the button for the mark complete, we've got this mark complete functionality. And what this is doing is this is emitting a custom event called our cross-sell complete event. And in this case, we're providing the record ID. And once again, it's because we may have multiple subtabs open that have that the case path component on it. So all those components are going to be listening to this event being emitted from the utility bar application. So this is that cross-sell utility bar application emitting that event. And what that means is we need to figure out for that component if the component needs to listen to it. So we have to provide some information. In this case, we're providing the record ID of the currently focused tab to let the component know, hey, there's 4 of these subtabs open. These 4 case path components are listening to this same event fire. It needs to understand which of those 4 need to be the ones that need to act on this event firing. So we fire that cross-sell event, and then we minimize the utility. And if we take a quick peek at what happens when we hit that cross-cell complete. So when that event gets fired, we check the parameter of the record ID to once again make sure that we're listening and we're acting on our record that we're currently instantiated for. And then once we determine it is our record ID, then we set the value of our status to closed, and then we save the record. And once again, this functionality down here, this case record handler is part of the Lightning data service, which lets you do those DML operations without needing a controller. Okay. With that, go ahead and go over the summary.
Sure. So that's the console. That's how you can config and code the console, principally in Lightning Console apps. So covered tabs and navigation, how you can automate the same behaviors that a user would do. We've talked about the utility bar and how you can both create utility bar apps and also control them and control things from within them using the third aspect was events and orchestration. So events are the way to communicate between components, and orchestration is an architecture whereby one component or one system is being the principal controller of a whole bunch of other systems. You centralize the logic for that. So thank you, everybody, very, very much. We have a couple minutes available for questions, and then delighted to talk with you afterwards if you have questions about the console. Can you use the mic if possible? Yeah, thanks.
Is this a GA or still in pilot?
It's ready. It's ready for you now. Okay. Do it.
Thanks.
Hi. Great job. Loved it.
Thanks.
I'm in one of those unfortunate orgs that is stuck in Classic for a little bit. But one of the things I saw this weekend that was really, or this week, that was really interesting was that I was about to build by myself was the dynamic pages. Do you guys know of or have any thoughts around putting a dynamic component into a Classic console?
So in theory, you could embed Lightning components inside Visual Force pages, and you could put Visual Force pages inside the Classic console. Mm-hmm. If you're talking about a Lightning component that is a whole Flexipage, this whole like app builder generated dynamic thing, we certainly have never tried it. You could certainly give it a shot, and I'm sure there'd be a lot of people interested. That definitely falls in the hacking category, but you might be able to get it to work.
Okay.
I mean, Lightning pages, these Flexipages that you generate using the app builder, they are Lightning components. Now, whether there is some restriction where you can't do Lightning in Visual Force using those, I'm not sure, but give it a shot and let folks know.
All right. Thanks.
One of the challenges we have with the utility bar in Lightning is that we can't move where it is. So we have a third-party component or third-party utility that we use that covers up a lot of the data that we need to be seeing when it's maximized. Would it be possible to, say, automatically minimize that when you change the focus to the page away from the component?
Yep, exactly. So you could listen to that tab-focused event. And so as soon as that focus changes, you can actually get some information as to what is that newly active tab. And if you don't need that utility bar to be expanded anymore, one of those features we showed you was you can use the API to minimize and maximize it as needed. And so you can listen to that and then minimize it.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Hi. You talked about changing like icons and header information of the utility bar.
Yep.
During the process, is it also possible to actually change the content, like do a step-by-step functionality to guide the user within one of those utility bar components and store information that has been entered? And
exactly, yes. I mean, it's a Lightning component just like any other. So if you needed kind of that step-by-step functionality, you could build it yourself. There's also a new feature, I'm not sure when it's coming out, if it's out yet, but there's Lightning Flows, which actually might be a better use case for what you're talking about, where that scenario, where it's kind of a point and click and you have a guided set of questions or information, and it uses, I think, flows
that-
behind the scenes.
Is that based on the normal flows?
Yeah,
Or-
so our sources up front say that it's GA now. Lightning flows might be beta. So
No,
it's-
actually, I was in another breakout session. They told you that they told me that it's like yet again a checkbox in the setup where that you need to activate to have those.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, look and feel of Lightning for your flows then available.
Well, there may be something to style your flow like Lightning, but what they're rolling out are actual pure Lightning flows where you use the flow designer, but instead of just having like a real simple form, you actually have a full-on Lightning component. So I know Apereo has a ton of demos. I guess we're gonna get hooked, but Apereo's got a lot of demos of Lightning Flow. So you actually have this is really not meant to be a plug for our company, but if you go out to the Lightning Zone out here and find the Apereo booth, we've got a bunch of Lightning Flow demos. You can get a full-on Lightning component. You can hook Lightning component to component to component using the flow designer. You can fire events. You can pass stuff to you can fire events and pass those events around the console or anywhere you want, and you can pass data back and forth. Lightning flows are super.